It was a single, desperate decision that changed everything. Fleeing a toxic past, she sought refuge in the arms of a stranger, a man whose world was built on shadows and power. In that one moment of sanctuary, their hearts recognized a missing piece in each other. He let her go, but some bonds, once forged, are unbreakable. No matter how far they run, destiny has a way of pulling two souls back together. The neon signs of soul blurred into streaky watercolors as Sienna Clark hurried down the crowded sidewalk, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She could feel his eyes on her before she even saw him. Sienna! The voice, sharp and possessive, cut through the city's hum like a shard of glass. She froze, her blood turning to ice. Dae-hyun emerged from the shadow of a storefront, his handsome face twisted with a familiar, volatile anger. The charming man she had once loved was gone, replaced by this stranger whose obsession had become her prison. "You've been ignoring my calls," he stated, stepping too close, his presence suffocating. The scent of his cologne, once comforting, now made her nauseous. "We need to talk, now." "Leave me alone, Dae-hyun," she pleaded, her voice a tremulous whisper. She took a step back, but he matched it, his hands snapping out to grip her wrist. His fingers were a vice. "I said, we need to talk." His voice was low, dangerous. The crowd flowed around them, a river of oblivious faces. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. This was it. He had finally cornered her. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape, a policeman, any port in this terrifying storm. And that's when she saw him, leaned against a sleek, obsidian black Genesis sedan. He was an oasis of unnerving calm. Lee Jae-ho. Even through her terror, she recognized the aura of absolute authority. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored black coat, his sharp gaze already fixed on the scene, observing with a detached, chilling interest. It was madness. To approach him was to walk into the lion's den, but Dae-hyun's grip tightened, his nails digging into her skin. "You're not going anywhere." So she ran. With a desperate wrench, she tore her arm from his grasp and bolted. She didn't think, didn't plan. Her feet carried her on a desperate, straight path across the pavement, and she threw herself against the solid, unyielding wall of Lee Jae-ho's chest. The impact was jarring. He didn't flinch, didn't stumble. His body was warm and hard as forged steel beneath the fine wool. The chaos of the street faded into a muffled silence, replaced by the steady, strong beat of his heart against her ear. The scent of him, sandalwood, cold night air, and sheer, unshakable power wrapped around her, a tangible shield against the world. She expected him to push her away. Instead, his arms tightened around her just once, a brief, solid confirmation of his promise. "I'll keep you safe." The words, spoken in that deep, controlled baritone, didn't feel like a mere comfort. They felt like a vow. When she dared to look up, his dark eyes were already on her, not with the fury she'd seen in Dae-hyun's, but with an unnerving, profound intensity. It was as if he was looking directly into the core of her fear and, without judgment, absorbing it. In that single, suspended moment, something clicked into place deep within her chest. A lock she hadn't known was empty, finally finding its key. He shifted, his body a protective wall between her and her ex. With a subtle nod from Jae-ho, two of his impeccably dressed associates materialized, discreetly guiding a sputtering, pale Dae-hyun away from the scene. The threat vanished as if it had never been. Then he gently loosened her grip. The night air felt cold where his warmth had been. "My car will take you home," Jae-ho said, his voice low, meant only for her. It wasn't a question. Still in a daze, Sienna could only nod. He guided her into the back seat of the sleek, black Genesis. As she sank into the plush leather, he didn't get in. He stood by the open door, a towering figure backlit by the city lights. Do not look back, he advised, his gaze holding hers for a heartbeat longer. Then he closed the door. The car pulled away smoothly. Sienna fought the overwhelming, irrational urge to turn around, to catch one last glimpse of him. She stared straight ahead, her arms wrapped around herself, still feeling the phantom imprint of his embrace. The driver didn't speak, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the engine carrying her back to her ordinary life. But it no longer felt ordinary. It felt colorless. Lee Jae-ho watched the tail lights of his car disappear into the flow of traffic. The spot where she had pressed against him still felt warm. He flexed his hand, remembering the feel of her slight frame shaking against him. He had dismantled empires and ended lives with less emotion than he felt in that single moment of holding her. A strange, unfamiliar sense of quiet settled in his chest, the echo of a heart he'd long since buried. He dismissed the feeling. It was a chance encounter, a moment of chivalry. It was over. He was wrong. Across the city, Sienna arrived at her modest apartment. It felt emptier than ever. She locked the door, leaning against it, her heart still pounding not from fear, but from the memory of a deep voice and the unshakable safety of a stranger's arms. She had escaped her ex. But as she slid down to the floor, she realized with terrifying clarity that she may have run straight into something else entirely. She was free. But for the first time, freedom felt lonely. A week had passed. The fear of Dae-hyun had been replaced by a different, more insistent hum under her skin. The memory of Lee Jae-ho. Sienna tried to bury herself in her work, translating dense legal documents, but the words often blurred. Her mind would drift, replaying the sensation of solid warmth, the scent of sandalwood, the absolute quiet that had settled in her soul when he held her. A key turned in the lock, and her best friend, Sora, breezed in, carrying a paper bag smelling of Chinese takeout. Okay, that's it. I'm staging an intervention. You've been sighing at that screen for days. Talk to me. Was it Dae-hyun? Did he contact you again? Sienna finally swiveled her chair away from the laptop. No, it's not him. She took a deep breath. Sora. Something happened. The night he cornered me. She told her everything. The terrifying confrontation, the panicked flight, and the decision to run toward the most dangerous man on the street. She described the immovable strength of him, the deep vow whispered into her hair, the way his mere presence made a monster like Dae-hyun shrink away in terror. Sora listened, her chopsticks forgotten, her eyes wide. He just let you go. He told you not to look back and sent you home in his car? She fanned herself dramatically. Sienna, that's not just chivalry. That's a K-drama hero entrance. A deadly, terrifying, I-would-risk-it-all kind of hero. It felt fateful, Sienna admitted, the confession feeling both foolish and profound, like my heart recognized something in his. And now, it's like that part of me is missing again. It's stupid, I know. It's not stupid, Sora said, her voice softening. It's chemistry, the kind you can't fake. But honey, he's Lee Jae-ho. That's not a man you have a crush on. That's a force of nature you survive. She nudged the food towards Sienna. Now eat. We need to fortify you against dangerously attractive mafia bosses with a savior complex. Lee Jae-ho stood in his private training room, his knuckles rapped. The heavy bag shuddered with each precise, powerful strike. Thud, thud, thud. He'd been trying to punch the memory out of his head for a week. The feel of her, the scent of her fear tangled with a faint, floral shampoo. The way her wide, terrified eyes had softened into something else entirely when she looked up at him. Not just gratitude, but a shocking, profound recognition. It was a weakness, a distraction he could not afford. His world was built on control, on the absence of such vulnerabilities. His head of security, Kang Min, entered, waiting silently until Jae-ho landed a final, devastating blow that sent the bag swinging violently. The man from last week, Dae-hyun, Kang Min reported. He's been asking questions in the underworld. He's looking for her. He's getting reckless. Jae-ho stilled, his chest heaving. A cold, familiar fury began to replace his frustration. He had given the man a warning. He had let him walk away. It was a mercy he rarely granted, and it had been for her sake, to keep her world clean of the blood that stained his. And this fool was spitting on that mercy. Find him, Jae-ho commanded, his voice low and lethally calm. Bring him to me. I will deliver the final warning myself. Kang Min nodded and turned to leave. And Kang Min, Jae-ho added, unwrapping his hands. The white tape fell to the floor like shed skin. Run a background check, Sienna Clark. I want to know everything. It was a breach of his own rules, an invitation for the complication he had sworn to avoid. But the echo of her heartbeat against his chest was a siren's call he could no longer ignore. He had let her go to keep her safe, but if her world could not keep her safe without him, then he would pull her back into his orbit. He would see her again. It was no longer a question of want. It was a necessity. The background check on Sienna Clark landed on Lee Jae-ho's desk not as a thick dossier, but as a slim, heartbreakingly simple file. An orphan, a scholarship student, a life built on quiet resilience and solitude. Her dream of a peaceful life as a translator was a direct rebellion against the chaos she had endured. There were no lovers before Dae-hyun, no family to miss her. The stark loneliness of her existence mirrored something deep within his own soul, a reflection he had spent a lifetime avoiding. He closed the file. The urge to see her, to simply lay eyes on her and confirm the strange peace she had sparked in him, became a physical ache. It was no longer about the threat of Dae-hyun. It was about the silence she had left in her wake, a silence his world of power and violence could not fill. He found her by accident, or perhaps it was the pull he felt toward her. From the tinted window of his Genesis, he saw her leaving a small, independent bookstore, a new book cradled in her arms. She paused on the sidewalk, tilting her face up to the weak afternoon sun, a small, wistful smile on her lips. It was a moment of pure, unguarded peace, and it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He told the driver to stop. He watched her for a full minute, his own world receding until it contained only her. This was the woman who had shattered his control with a single touch. She was a vulnerability, a liability of the highest order, and he craved her presence like a man in a desert craves water. Sienna felt it first as a prickle on the back of her neck, a sensation of being watched that was entirely different from the paranoid fear Dae-hyun inspired. This was heavy, intentional. Her breath hitched. She slowly lowered her gaze from the sky and let it sweep across the street. And there it was, the obsidian black Genesis. Her heart did not pound in fear. It stuttered, then settled into a heavy, thrilling rhythm. He was here. She couldn't see through the darkened windows, but she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he was inside, watching her. The car didn't move. It simply waited, a silent, powerful assertion of his presence in her life, a question and an answer all at once. She should have been terrified. She should have turned and run. Instead, she stood her ground, her eyes locked on the impenetrable window, her chin lifting just slightly. She wasn't the scared girl from last week. She was a woman who had tasted true safety and found herself addicted. For a long moment, they remained in that silent standoff across a busy Seoul street. Then, as smoothly and silently as it had appeared, the Genesis pulled away from the curb and merged into the traffic, disappearing from view. Sienna stood there long after it was gone, the phantom weight of his gaze still on her skin. The encounter was wordless, but it screamed 1,000 things. He was checking on her. He was in her world, even if she couldn't see him. And the most terrifying, exhilarating part was that she was glad. The colorless world she had returned to was suddenly vividly bright again. The invisible thread that had connected them in that first moment had just pulled taut. She was no longer just Sienna Clark, translator. She was a woman who had captured the attention of a king, and the game had just begun. The silence in the car was a physical weight. Jay-Ho's knuckles were white where he gripped his knee. The image of Sienna's defiant, unflinching gaze burned onto the back of his eyelids. She hadn't run. She had stood there, a lone sunflower turning toward a storm cloud, and accepted his presence. The click he'd felt a week ago was now a deafening roar in his veins. Letting her go had been a miscalculation. She was already in his world. She just didn't live there yet. He needed a reason, a justification that wasn't just the raw, possessive need that was foreign to him. Sienna tried to focus on her book, but the words were meaningless shapes. The memory of the black car, the certainty of his gaze, made her apartment feel like a cage once more. A sudden, sharp knock at the door made her jump. It wasn't Sora's cheerful rap. This was authoritative, final. Her heart hammered, a relic of fear from the Dai-Hyun days. She peered through the peephole. A man in a sharp, dark suit stood there, his posture ramrod straight. He was not Dae-Hyun. He was something else entirely. Miss Clark? His voice was polite but carried an undeniable weight. I have a message from Mr. Vunain, Stili. Hearing his name spoken aloud in a humble hallway felt like a dream. With trembling fingers, she opened the door. The man did not step inside. He merely bowed slightly and extended a single thick, cream-colored envelope. He requests your presence for a discussion. A car will be waiting for you tomorrow at 7 p.m. He left without another word, his footsteps echoing with a finality that left no room for refusal. Back inside, Sienna slid to the floor, the envelope feeling like a live wire in her hands. It contained no letter, just a single flawless black business card. Embossed in stark silver were two words, Lee Jae-ho, and below it, an address for one of the most exclusive restaurants in Seoul. This wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. The restaurant was all dark wood and soft lighting, a world away from the bustling streets below. Sienna was led to a private room, the door closing behind her with a hushed finality. And there he was. Lee Jae-ho stood by the window, looking out over the city he commanded. He turned as she entered, and the full force of his presence hit her anew. He was even more imposing than she remembered, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that seemed to absorb the light. His eyes, dark and fathomless, scanned her from head to toe, and she felt utterly laid bare. Miss Clark, he said, his voice that same low, controlled baritone that haunted her dreams. Thank you for coming. You didn't really give me a choice, she replied, her own voice surprisingly steady. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. There is always a choice. You chose to get in the car. He gestured for her to sit. The table was set for two, but it felt like a negotiation, not a dinner. Dae-Hyun will not trouble you again, he stated, pouring her a glass of water with his own hands. The gesture was intimate, at odds with his cold delivery. He has been made to understand the permanence of his mistake. A shiver went down her spine. She didn't want to know what that meant. Then why am I here? She asked, meeting his gaze. If the problem is solved. He leaned back, studying her. The problem of Dae-Hyun is solved. The problem of your safety is not. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. You live in a vulnerable building. You take public transport late at night. You are exposed. I've managed on my own for a long time, she said, a spark of defiance igniting within her. Surviving is not the same as living, Miss Clark, he countered, his voice dropping, becoming almost soft. I am offering you a position, as my personal translator. The work is legitimate, the pay is substantial. You would have an apartment in a secure building, a driver. You would be under my protection, officially. The world tilted. It was a lifeline and a gilded cage offered in the same breath. It was a logical, practical solution that perfectly masked the raw, illogical truth she saw simmering in his eyes. I cannot stay away from you. Sienna stared at him, the air crackling between them. This was the choice. Return to her lonely, colorless life of survival, or step fully into his world of shadow and power. Why? She whispered, her heart in her throat. Why me? Lee Jae-ho's intense gaze did not waver. Because, he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated in her very soul. The moment you ran into my arms, you became my responsibility. He leaned forward, his eyes holding hers captive. So, he said, the word a soft, dangerous challenge. What is your answer? Sienna's answer, after a night of frantic pacing and consulting a wide-eyed Sora, was a breathless yes. 2 days later, a different black car, less menacing, more luxurious, arrived to take her to her new life. It did not take her to a restaurant, but to the towering, sleek skyscraper that housed his corporate empire. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, and employees bowed their heads as she was escorted by a nervous-looking assistant to the top floor. She was shown into an office that was larger than her entire apartment. The wall was a single pane of glass, offering a dizzying view of the Han River, and behind a vast obsidian desk sat Lee Jae-ho. He looked up from a document, his expression unreadable. Miss Clark, punctual, good. I'm a professional, Mr. Lee, she said, smoothing her simple dress, feeling intensely out of place. We'll see. He gestured to a smaller, sleek desk, positioned not across the room, but a mere 10 feet from his own. Your station. Your first task. He slid a file across his desk. A business proposal from a Japanese conglomerate. Translate the highlighted sections. I needed by noon. It was legitimate work. Difficult, exacting work. For the next 3 hours, Sienna was immersed in the complex text. The only sound the scratch of her pen and the soft tapping of his fingers on a keyboard. The silence was broken by Jae-ho's voice, casual and yet utterly deliberate. The air conditioning, is it too cold for you? Sienna blinked, looking up from a particularly tricky clause. It's fine, thank you. He gave a single sharp nod and returned to his screen. 20 minutes later, he spoke again without looking up. That chair? Is it comfortable? I can have it replaced. The chair is perfect, Mr. Lee. Another nod. She was beginning to see the pattern. The fearsome Mafia boss, the man who could command a room with a glance, was fidgeting. He was creating reasons to speak to her, his questions banal, but his intense focus on her answers, anything but. Just before noon, he stood up and walked to her desk. He loomed over her, a tower of tailored wool and quiet intensity. He picked up her notepad, his fingers brushing against hers. A spark, swift and hot, jolted up her arm. Your handwriting is very precise, he remarked, studying her notes as if they were a fascinating ancient text. It helps me think, she managed, her voice slightly strangled. He hummed in response, a low, thoughtful sound. He didn't move away. He just stood there, filling her space, the scent of sandalwood making her head spin. He was checking her work, but it felt like he was checking her. Her reactions, her breath, the flutter of her pulse at her throat. Finally, he placed the notepad down. The translation is adequate. She fought the urge to roll her eyes. Adequate from him was likely a raving review from anyone else. However, he continued, his gaze finally lifting to lock with hers, you skipped lunch. I was focused on finishing the proposal. That is not acceptable, he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. From now on, you will take a proper lunch. My driver will take you wherever you wish. That's really not necessary. I can just. It is necessary, he interrupted, his voice softening to a near whisper that was only for her. I cannot have my new translator fainting from hunger. It would be inefficient. The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. It was the look of a man who knew his excuse was transparent and didn't care. He wanted to feed her. The sheer, unexpected domesticity of it, wrapped in a cloak of corporate efficiency, made her heart do a foolish, swooping flip. Now, he said, straightening up and returning to his throne behind the desk, the moment broken. I have a meeting. My driver is waiting downstairs. Do not argue. Sienna gathered her things, a slow, warm smile spreading across her face as she turned to leave. He was trying so hard to be the stern, impersonal boss and failing spectacularly. Just as her hand touched the doorknob, his voice stopped her. And Miss Clark? She glanced back. He was looking at his computer screen, his profile a study in feigned nonchalance. Order something substantial. No salad. The following week settled into a strange, intoxicating rhythm. Sienna's new apartment was a stunning, secure high-rise with a view that rivaled his own. A driver named Minsu, who was far too cheerful for his profession, was at her constant disposal. Her work was challenging, pulling her deeper into the legitimate, powerful side of Chu Jae-ho's empire. And every day, the dance continued. He never said anything outright romantic, but his attention was a constant, palpable force. If she mentioned offhandedly that she liked a specific type of tea, a box of it would appear on her desk the next morning. If she shivered once, the room's temperature was adjusted before she could even voice a complaint. He found endless, logical reasons to be near her, a question about a cultural nuance, a request to review a clause aloud. One afternoon, she was reading a document to him. He was standing by the window, his back to her, listening. As she finished, she looked up to find he had turned and was watching her with an expression that stripped away all pretense of business. It was raw, open want. Her breath caught. The air crackled. Then he blinked and the mask was back. Your pronunciation is improving, he said, his voice slightly huskier than usual. He walked to his desk, putting the solid wood between them once more. That will be all for today. It was both a rejection and a confession. He was fighting this as hard as she was falling. That evening, Minsu drove her to a high-end supermarket. Mr. Lee's instructions, he said cheerfully. Said you might want to stock your kitchen. As Sienna browsed the aisles, a familiar, chilling voice slithered into her ear. Fancy seeing you here, Sienna. Your new boyfriend upgrade your lifestyle? She froze, a can of coffee in her hand. Dai Hyun. He looked haggard, his eyes burning with a desperate, unstable light. He stepped closer, crowding her against a shelf. Did you really think you could just leave me? That I'd let you go? Before her panic could fully take root, a figure materialized beside her. It was Kangmin, Jae-ho's head of security. She hadn't even seen him. The lady is shopping, Kangmin said, his voice flat and cold. He didn't touch Dae-hyun, just stood between them, his presence an immovable wall. You are interrupting. Leave, now. Dae-hyun's bravado shattered. He paled, muttering curses as he scurried away. Sienna's hands were trembling. Kangmin turned to her, his demeanor shifting to one of polite deference. My apologies, Miss Clark. He won't bother you again. He then picked up a bag of the specific coffee beans she held. A good choice. Mr. Lee prefers this brand as well. He had been there the whole time. Jae-ho hadn't just given her a driver, he had given her a shadow. When she returned to her apartment feeling shaken, she found a small wrapped box waiting at her door. There was no card. Inside was a beautiful, sleek silver pendant on a delicate chain. It was elegant, understated, and utterly exquisite. she knew. It was an apology, a reassurance, a claim. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, but she knew who it was. Unknown. Wear it tomorrow. It wasn't a request. It was a command from a man who was done pretending he wasn't watching over every part of her life. And as Sienna clasped the necklace around her throat, she realized she didn't want him to stop. The cage was gilded, but her heart was beating a frantic, joyous rhythm against its bars. The necklace felt both like a shield and a brand against her skin. Sienna wore it the next day, the cool metal a constant reminder of Jay-Ho's silent, pervasive presence. He said nothing about it when she walked in, but his eyes lingered on the silver pendant for a heartbeat too long, a flicker of dark satisfaction in their depths. The workday was a study in excruciating tension. He was more demanding than usual, his critiques sharper, his presence a storm cloud at the desk next to hers. It felt like he was punishing her for the vulnerability Dae-Hyun had exposed, or perhaps punishing himself for caring. Frustrated after he'd dismissed her third translation draft with a terse, "not good enough," Sienna finally stood her ground. "Then tell me what is good enough, Mr. Lee. What exactly are you looking for?" He stood, his movements lethally smooth, and circled her desk. He braced his hands on either side of her, caging her in her chair, his face inches from hers. The scent of him, sandalwood and fury, was overwhelming. "I'm looking for you to understand," he said, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. "This world is not a game. That man is not just a nuisance. He is a symptom of the chaos that exists outside my protection. And you?" His gaze dropped to her lips. "You walk through it with a target on your back, and it makes me—" He cut himself off, jaw clenched. "It makes you what?" she challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It makes me irrational," he growled, the control finally snapping. He pushed away from the desk and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it. "I have empires to run, enemies to crush, and all I can think about is whether you are safe, whether you are warm, what you are eating." The confession hung in the air, raw and shocking in its honesty. The room fell silent. Sienna stood, her own frustration melting away into something softer, braver. She walked over to him, stopping just short of touching him. "So, stop thinking," she said softly. Her voice barely a whisper. "Just feel." She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of his tensed jaw. He flinched as if burned, his eyes flying to hers, wide with shock. No one touched Lee Jae-ho without permission, but he didn't pull away. He stood frozen, his breath catching, as her touch softened from a question into an answer. Her thumb stroked his cheek, a slow, soothing caress that unraveled the last of his control. With a sound that was half groan, half surrender, his hands came up to frame her face. His touch was not gentle. It was desperate, possessive, as if he was confirming she was real. "Sienna," he breathed, her name a prayer and a curse on his lips. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle first kiss. It was a collision, a release of all the pent-up tension, the fear, the longing of the past weeks. It was hard and demanding, a claiming of the territory he had already marked as his. She met him with equal fervor, her hands fisting in the lapels of his suit, pulling him closer, surrendering to the storm. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "This is a disaster," he whispered, but his arms tightened around her, pulling her flush against him. Sienna smiled, a true, radiant smile for the first time in what felt like forever. She could feel the frantic, joyous beat of his heart matching her own. "I know," she whispered back. The words hung between them, a shared truth that changed everything. "This is a disaster." "I know," but neither of them moved. His forehead remained against hers, his arms locked around her, as if letting go would shatter the new, fragile world their kiss had created. The disaster wasn't the kiss, it was the terrifying, exhilarating vulnerability that followed. Slowly, he pulled back just enough to look at her. The storm of frustration in his eyes had cleared, replaced by a dawning, terrifying wonder. He cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone with a reverence that stole her breath. This was no longer the mafia boss and his translator. This was a man and a woman, stripped bare of all pretenses. "I will keep you safe, Sienna," he vowed, his voice low and fervent. It was no longer the cool promise of a protector to a charge. It was the desperate oath of a man to the woman who had become his entire world. "I'm not afraid," she whispered, and for the first time she meant it completely. He kissed her again, this time softer, a slow, sealing promise that tasted of surrender and a new beginning. The rest of the day passed in a hazy, dreamlike state. The professional barrier between them had dissolved. He didn't return to his desk. Instead, he stayed near her, his presence a constant warm comfort. He asked about her work not with critique, but with genuine interest. He ordered food, substantial food, as he'd insisted before, and they ate at the small table in her corner of the office, the city sprawling beneath them. He told her about his legitimate business ventures, his vision for the company. She told him about her dreams of opening a small literary translation house one day. He listened, truly listened, as if her dreams were blueprints he was already committed to building. As evening fell, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he walked her to the car himself, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "Minsu will take you home," he said, his voice laced with a new, intimate warmth. "I have a meeting that can't be rescheduled. I will see you tomorrow." It wasn't a question. She nodded, her heart full. Tomorrow. The drive home felt different. The city lights weren't just lights. They were diamonds. Back in her apartment, she floated to the window, hugging herself. She replayed the feel of his lips, the intensity in his eyes, the solid safety of his arms. He was hers, and she was his. Her phone buzzed, a message from him. "J-Ho, did you eat?" She laughed, a joyful, bubbling sound. After the most earth-shattering kiss of her life, he was back to worrying about her meals. "Sienna, yes, I ate." "J-Ho, good. Sleep well." A pause. Then another message came through. "J-Ho, I meant what I said." She knew he wasn't talking about the food. A warm, secure feeling wrapped around her. She was loved. She was protected. The ghost of Dae-hyun, the fear that had defined her for so long, had finally, completely vanished. She was free, and she was walking into a new world, hand in hand with the most powerful man she had ever known. The text conversation from the night before played on a loop in Sienna's mind. When she arrived at the office the next morning, she found Jae-ho not at his desk, but waiting by hers. In his hands were 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "I recalled you take yours with a little cream," he said, his voice a low, intimate rumble as he handed one to her. The simple domestic gesture felt more profound than any grand declaration. "Thank you," she said, her fingers brushing his as she took the mug. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with the unspoken understanding that everything had changed. "The translation can wait," he stated, his gaze soft yet intense. "I have a different task for you today." He led her out of the skyscraper, not to a business meeting, but to the serene hanok where he had first taken her for safety. But this time, it felt different. The silence wasn't intimidating, it was peaceful. The space wasn't a refuge, it was a home. They walked through the meticulously kept garden, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if they had done it 1,000 times before. "I spoke with my lawyers this morning," he said, his tone casual, but his grip on her hand tightened slightly. "Dae-hyun has been presented with a choice. A one-way ticket to a new start in Busan, with a significant financial incentive to build a life there, on the condition he never contacts you or steps foot in Seoul again. Or the alternative he has already experienced. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his dark eyes searching hers. He chose Busan. He is gone, Sienna. For good. His number is blocked. His access to you is severed. That chapter of your life is closed. The news settled over her not with a dramatic crash, but with a quiet, final sigh. The last chain of her old life fell away. There was no more threat, no more looking over her shoulder. The freedom was absolute. Tears of pure, unadulterated relief welled in her eyes. But she was smiling. It's really over. It is, he confirmed, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. The chaos is gone. What remains? He paused, a rare hint of vulnerability in his expression. What remains is just us, if that is what you want. In answer, Sienna rose onto her toes and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to his lips. It was a kiss of gratitude, of promise, of a future she had never dared to imagine. It's all I've wanted since the moment I crashed into you, she whispered against his mouth, a true, unrestrained smile, one that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face, broke through his usual composure. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Later that evening, they sat together on the floor before the low table in the hanok, sharing a simple meal. There were no bodyguards in sight, no calls to take, no shadows of the past lurking. It was just two people, learning the quiet rhythms of each other. I never thought I could have this, Sienna said, her head resting on his shoulder, as they looked out at the starlit garden. Jae-ho pressed a kiss to her hair, his arm a solid, warm weight around her. Neither did I, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. But you rushed into my arms and you brought a peace I didn't know I was missing. You are my safety, Sienna. You are my home. The man who had built an empire on control had found his greatest strength not in power, but in surrender. And the woman who had been running from her past had finally found a future, safe in the arms of the man who had promised to keep her safe, and had, in the end, given her his entire world in return. And so, in the arms of a king, she found her forever. A story of dangerous power and fiercer love. If this tale of Lee Jae-ho and Sienna made your heart race, show us some love. Like, share, and subscribe for your next epic romance fix. Tell us in the comments which moment made you swoon the most.